Hello, my name is David Whyte, and today I will be talking about the rise of China, the Senkaku Islands, and what these mean for the future of the United States. The rise of China over the last 40 years has been a geopolitical issue for both East and West. The military, political, and economic development of China has been a seismic shift in East Asia that has resulted in a new power dynamic. In recent years, China's new muscle has been seen in issues as diverse as claims to the ownership of the Senkaku Islands, which puts them in conflict with Japan, to an alliance with Russia and widespread state-sponsored cyber warfare against the United States. The Cold War conflict between China and Japan over the Senkaku Islands has presented the global community with an extremely pressing issue. China and Japan are two of the most economically powerful nations in the world, surpassing Western nations such as England, France, and Germany, though not America. A military conflict between them and their neighbors could plunge the planet into a major world war and a deep depression that could take years to recover from. The purpose of this paper will be to examine the rise of China with a specific focus on its economic development over the last 30 years. Its military, political, and economic development has been nothing short of a miracle. Yet it has also affected the United States and the West. Should China continue its stratospheric rise through the ranks, there is a potential that it could put China and the United States at odds with one another, as it has over Japan's claim to ownership of the Senkaku Islands. In light of that, the research question for this project will be, what does the rise of China mean for the United States? Since the days of Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution that saw the simultaneous mass extermination of tens of millions of Chinese, followed by the economic and cultural transformation of the largest East Asian nation, China has been a steadily rising international power on the global stage in terms of its economic and military capabilities. Economically speaking, it has been among the greatest success stories since America became the world's largest manufacturer in the late 1800s, and then to attain the title of superpower at the end of World War II. According to Thomas G. Roski in the China Journal, the past 2 decades have brought big changes in every imaginable indicator of economic performance: output, productivity, employment, incomes, exports, life expectancy, height, weight, and so on. This success is completely unexpected. The economic ascendance of China has put it within visual range of the United States, where the United States is at $17.4 trillion and China is at $10.3 trillion, as defined by the International Monetary Fund in 2014. Among the next powers at the top of the GDP list are Japan, Germany, the United Kingdom, France, Italy, and Russia, which have routinely been in the positions of economic dominance for centuries. In that time, China stagnated and went into precipitous decline that left it vulnerable to foreign powers, specifically the West and Japan. The memories of that time still linger, and it appears that China is desperate to recoup that honor it lost during those centuries. There are some pressing problems with China's economic ascendancy, however, that demand extra consideration. Arthur Waldron, in The Rise of China, Military and Political Implications, says, "The Chinese economy today depends on an unhealthy degree on exports, roughly 40% of the GNP, compared to a more normal 20% at most for a large and populous continental state. And those exports are to a very great degree the product of foreign businesses making use of cheap Chinese labor for assembly and value-adding operations. China is not as economically sound or independent as it has led the world to believe for the past 25 years, but this does not deny its truly impressive improvements since the bygone days of the 1970s and 1980s, when it was seen as little more than an internally focused communist oligarchy. To some extent, that image has not changed, yet outsider observers cannot deny that the Chinese economy has been an inspirational example of financial innovation. The changes of the last 30 years have wrought much of that will be of interest to citizens of the United States and throughout the rest of the West. The secrecy of the Chinese state and the Communist Party regarding its economic, military, and political objectives renders it a nation that must be carefully watched and observed, lest it gain significant footholds and positions of prominence against the Western powers. In history, China seldom interacted with European powers, despite it having significantly larger armies and populations than the whole of Europe. China, in a position of global influence and actively using that influence, would be a game changer that the world has not seen before. Perhaps a modern example that would surpass its uniqueness would be the success of the former British-owned colonies of the United States of America, which rose in a matter of 200 years from 13 mini-nations to a continent-spanning union of 50 states that could project power anywhere in the world.
Navy, a global force.
Chinese military developments have been an ongoing issue for them since the Sino-Japanese War, which saw Japan initiate a brutal campaign in mainland China that killed roughly 15 million people. To put it mildly, both nations have had a tense and heated relationship over the last 70 years, which has not been abated by the post-World War II peace by the Allied powers. In spite of the largely passive-aggressive hostilities and the grievances between them, the United States maintains close economic and political contact with both Japan and China. The antagonistic relationship between Japan and China, however, has sparked a growing and potentially deadly international crisis, with claims of Chinese versus Japanese. Politically speaking, the United States supports Japan, yet China is its biggest economic beneficiary and partner. American political and military leadership affirms Japan's claims to the Senkaku Islands, which puts the United States at odds with China. Should Chinese and Japanese engage in a hot war over the Senkaku Islands, it will most certainly compel the United States to decide on not only if to enter, but on whose sides and to what end. This makes resolving the Senkaku Islands dispute an issue of paramount importance for the United States, as a war between both sides would certainly hurt the American economy, regardless of which side the United States entered on. The worlds of politics, economics, and military intelligence have been watching the rise of China with an increasingly wary eye over the last 20 years. Economically, China is now the second wealthiest and most productive nation on Earth behind the United States. Politically, it has become an influential global player that now dominates the East Asian region. Militarily, it is transitioning from a bottom-tier power into one capable of projecting strength from beyond its own borders and shores. All of these changes have been noticed and have received attention from journals, politicians, and military professionals who alternatively view China as a success story and a future adversary. Contradictory accounts of China's motives and intentions have been dissembled in the media and governmental sources alike, yet one thing has been consistent in their articles: China's antagonistic relationship with Japan. The Senkaku Islands and the East China Sea have been the site of extremely tense altercations between the two regional powers, which has naturally attained the strict attention of both Eastern and Western military and intelligence officials alike. The rise of China has been largely peaceful, but there is evidence that this is about to change. The conflict over the Senkaku Islands, what China calls the Diaoyu Islands, and in English is called the Pinnacle Islands, has been a fiery point of contention between China and Japan that has left the two powers in a state of simmering Cold War that could devolve into a hot war with the right provocation. The anti-Japanese sentiment within China is fueled in part because of Japanese actions during World War II, including atrocities they committed against Chinese citizens. Recent actions by Japan to gain a permanent position on the United Nations Security Council were met with extreme antipathy by the Chinese. The news triggered the fear among Chinese people around the world that this could be the chance for Japan to win its bid for permanent membership in the Security Council. Within 1 week, tens of millions of Chinese signed internet petitions to oppose Japan's bid, citing its World War II atrocities and continuing denial of that history as the main reasons. Massive anti-Japanese demonstrations quickly erupted in dozens of Chinese cities spanning over 20 provinces, and even escalated to violent attacks on Japanese nationals and diplomatic stations. In order to fully understand the problems associated with these territorial disputes, a proper methodology is needed. To do so, this paper utilizes a qualitative analysis that will examine the circumstances and the requisite sources. The Chinese view Japan as their principal adversary and have done so since the Sino-Japanese War, which saw millions of Chinese lose their lives at the hands of Japanese soldiers invading the mainland. The memories of this war still linger in Chinese culture and have not been abated by the stratospheric rise of China's economy, military, and geopolitical influence. Indication of economic hostility between China and Japan can be seen in a 2010 dispute between the two rival powers about rare earth metals. China denied shipment of rare earth metals to Japan after Japan denied the release of a Chinese fishing boat captain that came in contact with Japanese ships. Economic rivalries between nations are not unheard of, but when evidence is shown of two regional powers engaging in low-level economic warfare, the indications of potential future conflicts grow stronger and seems more plausible. Recent years have seen the Chinese become more openly aggressive towards the Japanese, while at the same time there have been calls for peace on both sides before the conflict evolves into something that neither can contain. China and Japan would benefit through continued cooperation, as would the United States and Russia, yet the rivalries between these great powers has intensified over the years to a degree not seen since the early years of the Cold War. If we do not want a repeat of those turbulent years, then these nations must work to maintain that peace, or they will be drawn into a dangerous decades-long conflict that saw entire governments topple and nations born and die. As China is one of the premier powers of the 21st century, it has its own responsibilities to ensure peace in East Asia. Whether or not it will keep that peace is something only time will tell.